The widow Sarah Sinclair stood in the dusty street of Empire City, Nevada, on a scorching August afternoon in 1876, watching as her husband's coffin was lowered into the hard ground, and all she could feel was a terrible, crushing relief that made her hate herself just a little bit more. Thomas Sinclair had been a charming man when sober, which was perhaps 3 days out of every 30, and a violent monster the rest of the time, leaving bruises on her arms and ribs that she'd hidden beneath long sleeves even in the desert heat. The preacher's words washed over her like meaningless water as she stood there in her borrowed black dress, knowing that the whole town whispered about her behind their hands, wondering if she'd finally had enough and poisoned him herself. She hadn't, though the thought had crossed her mind more times than she cared to admit. Thomas had simply drunk himself to death at 32 years old, his liver giving out in a final act of rebellion against the whiskey he'd poured down his throat every single day of their 5-year marriage. Sarah was 24 years old and felt ancient, her youth stolen by a man who'd promised her the world when she was a naive 19-year-old girl fresh off the wagon train from Missouri. Her parents had died of cholera on the trail west, and Thomas had seemed like salvation itself, a handsome silver miner with sweet words and a pocket full of silver dollars. The wedding had been quick, the honeymoon even quicker, and then the drinking had started in earnest. Or perhaps it had always been there, and she'd been too desperate and alone to notice the signs. Now she was alone again, but this time it felt different. Alone felt like possibility instead of abandonment. Alone felt like she could finally breathe without wondering if the smell of whiskey on someone's breath meant pain was coming. The small gathering dispersed quickly after the burial, most people eager to escape the brutal afternoon sun. Sarah remained by the grave for a few minutes longer, not out of grief but out of a strange sense of ceremony, as if she needed to mark this moment somehow. This was the end of one life, and the beginning of another. Mrs. Sinclair. The voice behind her was deep and unfamiliar, roughened by wind and weather, and something that sounded like genuine sympathy. Sarah turned to find herself looking up at a man she'd never seen before, though that wasn't saying much in a mining town where prospectors came and went like tumbleweeds. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that strained against a worn leather vest, and arms thick with muscle that spoke of hard physical labor. His hair was dark brown and hung past his collar, sun-streaked and a bit wild, framing a face that was handsome in a rugged, weathered way. A thick beard covered his jaw, neatly trimmed despite his otherwise rough appearance. His eyes were a startling shade of blue-gray, like storm clouds over the mountains, and they looked at her with an intensity that made her take an involuntary step backward. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, and somehow she knew he didn't mean Thomas specifically. He meant everything that had led her to this dusty graveyard in the middle of Nevada. His gaze flickered to her wrist, where her sleeve had ridden up slightly, revealing the yellowing edge of an old bruise, and something hardened in his expression. "Thank you," Sarah replied carefully, tugging her sleeve down. "I don't believe we've met." "No, madam. Name's Boone Everett. I just arrived in Empire City yesterday looking for work in the mines." He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with social niceties, but pushing through anyway. "I'm staying at the boarding house, and Mrs. Chen mentioned your husband had passed. I wanted to pay my respects." Sarah studied him more carefully. There was something different about Boone Everett, something in the deliberate way he moved and spoke, like every action was conscious and controlled. His hands were scarred and calloused, the hands of a man who knew hard work, but they were steady as stone. She'd grown expert at reading men over the past 5 years, at spotting the telltale signs of drink in trembling fingers and bloodshot eyes. Boone's eyes were clear, his hands rock steady. "That's kind of you, Mr. Everett," she said, meaning it. Most of the miners in town had avoided her, either because they felt awkward around widows, or because they'd heard Thomas's drunken boasts in the saloons about keeping his woman in line. "If you're looking for mine work, you should speak to Mr. Patterson at the Silver Star. They're always hiring men willing to go deep." "Appreciate the advice, madam." Boone nodded, then hesitated as if weighing whether to say more. Finally he added, "Mrs. Chen also mentioned you might be looking for work yourself now. Said your husband didn't leave much in the way of savings." Heat flooded Sarah's cheeks. It was true, of course. Thomas had drunk away every dollar he'd ever earned, and what little she'd managed to save from taking in washing had gone to pay for his burial. She had perhaps $20 to her name and a month's rent owed on the tiny house they'd lived in. But having this stranger know the extent of her poverty made shame curl in her stomach. "I'll manage," she said stiffly. "I'm sure you will. You look like a survivor to me." Boone's tone held no pity, just a kind of recognition, as if he knew what it meant to claw your way through hard times. "But if you hear of anyone needing a hand with heavy work, building, chopping wood, that sort of thing, I'd appreciate you sending them my way. I'm good with my hands and not afraid of honest labor." There was something almost old-fashioned about the way he spoke, a formality that seemed at odds with his rough appearance. Sarah found herself curious despite her better judgment. "Most men come to Nevada for the silver, Mr. Everett. Why are you looking for odd jobs?" His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mining pays better, that's true. But miners get paid on Saturdays, and Saturdays in mining towns mean saloons full of men spending their wages on whiskey. I find it's better for me to stay clear of that whole situation." He met her eyes squarely, and she saw something raw and honest in his gaze. "I was a drunk for 10 years, madam. Nearly killed myself and hurt people I cared about. Been sober for 2 years now, every single day, and I plan to stay that way. That means avoiding temptation where I can find it." Sarah's breath caught in her chest. The honesty of his admission stunned her. Men didn't talk about such things, especially not to strange women in graveyards. They made excuses, blamed others, pretended that drinking was under control or not really a problem. Thomas had promised to quit 100 times, always with elaborate explanations about stress or bad luck or how she'd driven him to it. Never once had he taken responsibility the way Boone just had, in 3 simple sentences. 2 years is a long time," she said quietly. 730 days, give or take," Boone replied. "I count each one as a blessing and a battle. Some days are harder than others, but I made a vow to myself and to the memory of my sister that I'd never touch another drop. She died while I was passed out drunk, unable to help when she needed me most. I won't dishonor her memory by breaking that vow." The raw pain in his voice was unmistakable. Sarah felt something crack in the armor she'd built around her heart. Here was a man who'd been where Thomas had been, but had found the strength to climb out of that dark hole. Here was a man who understood what alcohol could do to a person, to a family, and who fought against it every single day. "I'm sorry about your sister," she said, and meant it with her whole heart. "Me too." Boone cleared his throat, seeming to realize he'd said more than he'd intended. "I should let you get on with your day, Mrs. Sinclair. Again, I'm sorry for your loss." He turned to leave, and Sarah heard herself call out before she could think better of it. "Mr. Everett, wait." He stopped, turning back with a questioning look. She took a breath, making a decision that felt both reckless and absolutely right. "Mrs. Chen at the boarding house, you said? I'll be sure to mention your name if I hear of anyone needing work, and if you're not opposed to it, I could use some help myself. The roof on my house has some loose shingles, and there's a fence that needs mending. I can't pay much, but I can offer dinner and what little I can spare." Something shifted in Boone's expression, a softening around his eyes. "I'd be happy to help, madam, and you don't need to pay me anything. Just point me to the work and I'll see it done." "I insist on paying you something," Sarah said firmly. "I won't accept charity." A hint of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Fair enough. How about you pay me in meals instead of money? A home-cooked dinner would be worth more to me than dollars right now." Sarah felt her own lips curve slightly in response. "That seems like a poor bargain for you. Mr. Everett, you haven't tasted my cooking yet." "I'll take my chances." His smile widened just a fraction, transforming his stern face into something warmer. "When would you like me to start?" "Tomorrow morning, if that suits you. The house is the small blue one on the end of Copper Street." "I'll be there at first light." Sarah watched him walk away, his long stride eating up the dusty ground, and wondered what on earth she'd just done. She'd invited a strange man, a self-admitted drunk, to her home. It was foolish and potentially dangerous, but something in Boone Everett's eyes had called to something in her own battered soul. He understood. He knew what it meant to live with a drunk, even if he'd been on the other side of it, and his determination to stay sober, his clear-eyed recognition of his own demons, gave her a hope she hadn't felt in years. Maybe not all men were like Thomas. Maybe some of them actually fought their battles instead of drowning them in whiskey. That night, Sarah lay in her narrow bed in the house that no longer felt like a prison, listening to the silence. No stumbling footsteps, no slurred cursing, no crash of bottles or furniture, just quiet, blessed quiet. For the first time in 5 years, she didn't have to sleep with one ear open, waiting for danger. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of release, of a burden finally lifted, of a future that might hold something other than fear. True to his word, Boone appeared on her doorstep just as the sun was beginning to paint the desert sky in shades of pink and gold. Sarah had been up for an hour already, unable to sleep past dawn from years of habit. She'd put coffee on to boil and was mixing biscuit dough when his knock came. "Good morning, Mr. Everett," she said, wiping flour from her hands on her apron. "Morning, Mrs. Sinclair. Brought my own tools." He held up a worn canvas bag that clinked with the sound of hammers and nails. "If you want to show me the trouble spots, I'll get started." Sarah led him around the small property, pointing out the loose shingles, the sagging fence posts, the back step that had rotted through and was dangerous to walk on. Boone listened carefully, occasionally asking questions about how long something had been broken or whether she had materials on hand. His professionalism put her at ease. This was clearly a man who knew his craft. "I'll need to buy some lumber for that step and a few of the fence posts," he said after his inspection. "The shingles I can work with what you have. If you give me a list of what else needs doing inside, I can pick up materials when I go into town." "I can't ask you to spend your own money on my repairs," Sarah protested. "You're not asking. I'm offering." Boone's tone was gentle but firm. "Consider it an investment. Good work leads to recommendations, and recommendations lead to more work. Besides, a woman living alone needs a safe house. That step is an accident waiting to happen." Sarah wanted to argue, but the simple truth was that she needed the help and couldn't afford to be too proud to accept it. "I'll pay you back as soon as I can," she said instead. "No rush." Boone set his tool bag down and began pulling out hammers, nails, a saw. "Mind if I ask what you did before? For work, I mean." "I took in washing and mending," Sarah replied. "I'm good with a needle, and I can get stains out of just about anything. But most of the miners send their laundry to Mrs. Chen now because she has help and can turn it around faster." "What about dressmaking? Seems like there's always call for that." Sarah shrugged. "Some, but not enough to make a steady living. Most women in Empire City make do with catalog orders or hand-me-downs. The ones with money for custom dresses usually travel to Carson City where there are proper seamstresses." Boone nodded thoughtfully, then climbed up onto the roof with an ease that spoke of experience with heights. Sarah went back inside to finish her biscuits, but she found herself glancing out the window every few minutes to watch him work. He moved with efficiency and confidence, his powerful arms making quick work of prying up old shingles and hammering new ones into place. Sweat darkened his shirt across his broad back, and she found herself noticing the play of muscles beneath the fabric. She jerked her attention back to her cooking, feeling her face heat. What was wrong with her? Her husband had been in the ground less than 24 hours, and here she was admiring another man's physique like some kind of shameless hussy. Guilt twisted in her stomach, though a quieter voice in her head whispered that she'd mourned her marriage long before Thomas died. She'd cried all her tears years ago. What she felt now wasn't desire, she told herself firmly. It was simple appreciation for someone helping her. Nothing more. By mid-morning, Boone had finished the roof and was working on the fence. Sarah brought him a cup of water and some of the biscuits she'd made, along with butter and jam. "You're making good progress," she said, handing him the plate. "It's good work. Keeps my hands busy and my mind clear." Boone accepted the food gratefully, downing the water in a few long swallows. The day was already growing hot, the Nevada sun merciless even in late summer. "These are excellent," he added after biting into a biscuit. "Best I've had in years." "Thank you." Sarah felt absurdly pleased by the compliment. Thomas had never noticed her cooking except to complain when dinner wasn't ready the moment he wanted it. "Where did you learn carpentry?" "My father was a builder back in Colorado. Taught me and my brother the trade from the time we could hold a hammer." A shadow crossed Boone's face. That was before I took to drinking and lost everything. Spent 10 years drifting from mining camp to logging camp to cattle ranch, doing whatever work I could find between benders, finally hit bottom in California, and realized I either quit drinking or died. Decided I'd rather live. What made you come to Nevada? Boone was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. Needed a fresh start somewhere. Nobody knew me as the town drunk. Figured a mining town would have plenty of work, and I was right. Just have to be careful about the temptations. He focused back on her, and his expression was serious. I want you to know, Mrs. Sinclair, I understand if my past makes you uncomfortable. If you'd rather I finish up today and not come back, I won't take offense. Why would I want that? Sarah asked, genuinely confused. Because I was a drunk, and your husband was a drunk, and maybe you don't want that reminder around. His voice was matter of fact, but she could hear the pain underneath. I know what men like me do to the people around them. The fear, the uncertainty, the violence. I'm not that man anymore. But I understand if you can't separate who I was from who I'm trying to be. Sarah looked at this big, scarred man standing in her yard, offering her an out, giving her the choice. Thomas had never given her choices. He'd taken and demanded and forced. Boone was asking, always asking, respecting her right to decide. You're not like my husband, she said quietly but firmly. Thomas never admitted he had a problem. He never tried to quit, never took responsibility for what he did. You're fighting your demons every day, and that takes more courage than most men ever have to find. I don't want you to leave, Mr. Everett. I want you to finish the work, and then I want you to come inside and have a proper meal. Something in Boone's eyes softened, a vulnerability showing through his gruff exterior. Thank you, madam. That means more than you know. He turned back to his work, and Sarah retreated to the house, her heart beating faster than it should. There was something happening here, something she didn't quite understand yet. A connection forming between two wounded souls who understood pain and survival in ways most people never would. It was too soon, far too soon, but she couldn't deny what she felt. Hope, interest. The first stirrings of attraction that had nothing to do with desperation and everything to do with genuine respect and admiration. Over the next week, Boone came by every morning and worked until the worst heat of the day drove even him to seek shade. He fixed the fence, replaced the rotted step, repaired loose boards on the porch, and even built Sarah a new clothesline when he noticed her old one was fraying dangerously. She fed him breakfast and lunch, and they fell into an easy rhythm of conversation that surprised them both. Boone told her about growing up in Colorado, about his sister Emily who'd been 10 years younger and had looked up to him like he'd hung the moon, about how he'd started drinking at 18 after a girl broke his heart, and how it had slowly consumed his life until he was 40 years old and had nothing left but a bottle and regrets. Emily had tried to help him, had believed in him when no one else did, and then she'd gotten sick with pneumonia and needed medicine he couldn't afford because he'd drunk away his wages. By the time he'd sobered up enough to realize how bad she was, it was too late. She'd died at 19 years old, and it was his fault. I swore over her grave that I'd never touch another drop, he said, his voice rough with emotion, that I'd be the man she'd believed I could be. It's been 2 years and 43 days now, and there hasn't been a single day I haven't wanted to drink, but I don't. Every morning I wake up and I make the choice to stay sober. Every night I go to bed and I count it as a victory. Sarah shared her own story, haltingly at first, then with growing confidence as Boone listened without judgment. She told him about meeting Thomas, about how charming he'd been at first, about the wedding that had seemed like a fairy tale, about the first time he'd hit her, 3 months into their marriage, and how she'd believed his tearful apologies and promises to change, about 5 years of walking on eggshells, of hiding bruises, of lying to neighbors about how she'd gotten hurt, about the relief and guilt she'd felt, watching his coffin lowered into the ground. "You've got nothing to feel guilty about," Boone said fiercely. "You survived. That's not something to be ashamed of. That's something to be proud of." "I wished him dead," Sarah whispered, the confession she hadn't been able to make to anyone else. "So many times I wished he would just die and leave me alone. What kind of person does that make me?" "A human one." Boone reached across the table where they sat over lunch and covered her hand with his own. His palm was warm and calloused, steady as stone. You're not responsible for what he did to you, and you're not responsible for his death. He killed himself with drink, same as I almost did. The difference is, he never tried to stop." Sarah looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast of his sun-darkened skin against her paler fingers. She should pull away. It was too soon, too fast, too everything. But his touch felt safe in a way she'd never known touch could feel, comforting instead of threatening, offering instead of demanding. "Thank you," she said softly. Boone squeezed her hand gently, then released it, seeming to realize he'd overstepped. "I should get back to work. That porch won't fix itself." But something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that went beyond friendship. Sarah felt it in the way Boone's gaze lingered on her when he thought she wasn't looking. She felt it in her own quickening pulse when he smiled at her. They were two broken people finding something unexpected in each other's company. Something that felt like healing. Something that might, given time, become something more. The town of Empire City noticed, of course. Small towns always did. Women whispered behind their fans when Sarah walked to the general store. Men gave Boone knowing looks when he stopped by the lumber yard. Mrs. Chen, the boarding house owner, cornered Sarah one afternoon when she came to pick up some mending work. "That mountain man staying at my place, he is working on your house every day," Mrs. Chen said, her English accented but clear. She'd come from China 10 years ago and had built a successful business through hard work and shrewd investment. "People are talking." "Let them talk," Sarah said with more confidence than she felt. "Mr. Everett is doing repairs I can't afford to hire anyone else to do. There's nothing improper about it." Mrs. Chen's wise eyes studied her carefully. "He is a good man, that one. Quiet, respectful, pays his rent on time, never drinks, never causes trouble. You could do worse." "I'm not doing anything," Sarah protested. "My husband has been dead barely 2 weeks." "Your husband was a no-good drunk who beat you," Mrs. Chen said bluntly. "I saw the bruises even when you tried to hide them. You don't owe his memory anything. You are young, you are free. If that big, strong man makes you happy, you take happiness where you find it." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes at the casual acceptance, the lack of judgment. What if it's too soon? What if people think badly of me? People will always think something. Better they think you moved on too fast than you wasted your life mourning a man who didn't deserve your tears. Mrs. Chen patted her hand. "Life is short and hard, especially for women alone in Nevada. You find someone who treats you right. You hold on to him." The words stayed with Sarah as she walked home, her arms full of shirts that needed buttons replaced. Maybe Mrs. Chen was right. Maybe she was allowed to be happy, even if it seemed too soon by society's standards. Thomas had stolen 5 years of her life. Did she really owe him any more time than that? When she arrived home, she found Boone sitting on her newly repaired porch steps, looking troubled. Her heart sank. Had someone said something to him? Had he decided this was too complicated? "Is everything all right?" she asked carefully. Boone stood, running a hand through his long hair. "I need to talk to you about something, and you're not going to like it." Sarah set down her bundle of mending, steeling herself for disappointment. "Go on." "I got offered a job today. Regular work at a ranch about 20 miles north of here. They need someone to repair their outbuildings and corrals, maybe a month or 2 of steady employment. The pay is good, real good. Better than anything I'll find in Empire City." "That's wonderful," Sarah said, forcing brightness into her voice even as her heart crumbled. Of course he was leaving. Why would he stay for her? They barely knew each other. "You should take it." "I told them I needed to think about it." Boone stepped closer, his storm cloud eyes intense. "Because I don't want to leave if it means I won't see you anymore." Sarah's breath caught. "What?" "These past 2 weeks have been the best I've had in years," Boone said, his voice low and rough with emotion. "Working with my hands again, having someone to talk to who understands, having you to talk to. I know it's too soon, I know people will talk, but I need you to know that I care about you, Sarah, more than I have any right to." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and it sent shivers down her spine. "I care about you too," she whispered, "but I don't know if I'm ready for anything more than friendship. I don't know if I'll ever be ready." "I'm not asking for more than you can give," Boone said quickly. "I just want to be honest about how I feel. If you want me to take that job and move on, I will. If you want me to stay in Empire City and we keep doing what we're doing, taking it slow, I'll find work here. Whatever you need, Sarah, this is your choice." The power of having a choice, of having her wishes respected and honored, was almost overwhelming. Sarah looked at this good, damaged man who'd been through his own hell and come out the other side, who fought his demons every single day and never made excuses, who looked at her like she was something precious and valuable, not property to be used and discarded. "I want you to stay," she said, her voice stronger now, "but I need time. I need to figure out who I am without someone telling me. I need to heal. Then I'll stay and I'll wait." Boone's smile was like sunrise, warm and hopeful. "I've got nothing but time, and you're worth waiting for." He did stay. He found work doing repairs around town, building a reputation as a skilled carpenter and a reliable man. He came by Sarah's house 3 or 4 times a week, always with an excuse about checking on previous repairs or asking her advice about a job. They talked for hours, sharing stories and dreams and fears. He never pushed for more than she was ready to give, never assumed anything beyond friendship. And slowly, carefully, Sarah felt herself begin to trust again, begin to hope again, begin to imagine a future that held more than just survival. 2 months after Thomas's death, Boone asked Sarah to walk with him to the edge of town where the desert met the mountains. The evening was cool, the brutal summer heat finally breaking as autumn approached. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, and then Boone stopped at a spot where they could see the whole valley spread out before them, the lights of Empire City twinkling in the gathering dusk. "I need to tell you something," he said, turning to face her, "and I need you to hear me out before you say anything." Sarah's heart hammered, but she nodded. "All right." "I'm falling in love with you," Boone said simply. "Maybe I already have fallen. I think about you every moment I'm not with you. I dream about you at night. You make me want to be better, to stay strong, to keep fighting the drink because I want to be worthy of you." He held up a hand as she started to speak. "I know it's only been 2 months. I know people will say it's too soon, that we don't know each other well enough, but I've lived more in these 2 months than I did in the 10 years I spent drunk. You've given me something to live for besides just staying sober. You've given me hope." "Boone, Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I'm scared. I know you are. I'm terrified too." He took her hands in his grip gentle but sure. "I'm scared I'll mess this up. I'm scared I'll let you down. I'm scared that one day the craving for drink will be too strong and I'll break my vow. But I'm more scared of losing you because I was too much of a coward to tell you how I feel." "I've never been loved the right way," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "I don't know if I know how to accept it or return it. Thomas said he loved me and then he hurt me. How do I know this is different?" "Because I'm choosing you every day the same way I choose to stay sober," Boone said, his thumbs stroking over her knuckles. "Love isn't something that just happens, and then you're done. It's a choice you make over and over. Choose to be kind, to be patient, to be honest. Choose to stay when things get hard instead of running to a bottle or fists. I can't promise I'll be perfect, Sarah, but I can promise I'll choose you every single day for the rest of my life if you'll let me." Sarah looked up at his face, at the raw honesty in his eyes, and felt something break open inside her. All the walls she'd built, all the armor she'd wrapped around her heart cracked and crumbled. This was real. This was the kind of love she'd dreamed of as a girl before Thomas had taught her that love was just another word for ownership. "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered, "and it terrifies me." Boone's smile was brilliant, transforming his stern face into something beautiful. "Can I kiss you?" Even now, even in this moment, he was asking permission, giving her control. Sarah rose up on her toes and answered by pressing her lips to his. The kiss was gentle and tentative at first, both of them uncertain, and then it deepened into something sweet and passionate and full of promise. Boone's arms came around her, holding her close but never too tight, always leaving her room to pull away if she wanted. But Sarah didn't want to pull away. She wanted to sink into this feeling, into the safety and warmth of being held by someone who cherished her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Boone rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right," he said. "Court you properly, marry you if you'll have me, build a life together. I want everything with you, Sarah." "I want that too," Sarah said, and realized with wonder that she meant it. "But we need to take it slow. I need time to be sure." "We'll take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." They walked back to town, hand in hand, and Sarah felt lighter than she had in years. She was still scared, still uncertain, but she was also hopeful in a way she'd forgotten was possible. Boone had shown her that not all men were like Thomas, that love could be gentle and respectful and real, that she deserved better than what she'd settled for out of desperation and loneliness. Word of their courtship spread through Empire City like wildfire, as expected. Most people were supportive or at least politely neutral. A few clucked their tongues about the unseemly haste of the widow taking up with another man. But Sarah found she didn't care what they thought. She'd spent 5 years caring too much about what Thomas thought, walking on eggshells to avoid his displeasure. She was done living her life for other people's approval. Boone proved as good as his word. He courted her with old-fashioned courtesy, bringing her wildflowers from the desert, fixing things around her house, walking her to church on Sundays. He never presumed anything, never pushed for more than she was ready to give. They talked about everything, their pasts and their hopes for the future, their fears and dreams. He told her about his struggle with sobriety, how some days were harder than others, how he'd developed routines and strategies to cope with the cravings. Morning walks to clear his head, evening prayers of gratitude, staying away from saloons and the men who frequented them, counting his sober days like precious coins. 798 days, he told her one evening as they sat on her porch watching the sunset. Almost 2 years and 2 months. "Are you proud of yourself?" Sarah asked. "Every single day." Boone took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "But I'm also realistic. I know I'm one bad choice away from throwing it all away. That's why I have to be vigilant, why I can't ever let my guard down." "What if something happens that makes you want to drink?" Sarah asked quietly. "What if we have a fight or times get hard? How do I know you won't turn back to the bottle?" It was the question that haunted her late at night, the fear she hadn't been able to voice until now. Boone was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer carefully. "I can't make you a promise that I'll never be tempted," he said finally. "The temptation is always there, probably always will be. But I can promise that I'll never stop fighting it, that I'll use every tool I have to stay sober, and most importantly, I can promise that if I feel like I'm slipping, I'll tell you. I won't hide it or pretend everything's fine. I'll ask for help." He turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "My sister died because I was too proud and ashamed to admit I had a problem. I won't make that mistake again. If you marry me, Sarah, you'll have complete honesty. Even when it's ugly, even when it's hard, no secrets, no lies." "If I marry you," Sarah repeated, her heart fluttering. "When you marry me," Boone corrected with a slight smile. "I'm an optimistic man these days." Sarah laughed, the sound surprising her. When was the last time she'd laughed with genuine joy? "You're also a presumptuous one. Can you blame me? You're the best thing that's ever happened to me." Boone raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "Take all the time you need to be sure. I'll be here." As autumn turned to winter, Sarah found herself more and more certain. Boone continued to prove himself day after day, not just with words, but with actions. When the temperature dropped and she struggled to keep her small house warm, he brought wood he'd chopped himself and installed a better stove. When she worried about money, he helped her set up a small dressmaking business, building her a proper sewing table and spreading word among the miners' wives that she was available for custom work. When she had nightmares about Thomas, he held her and reminded her that she was safe now, that no one would hurt her again. He also introduced her to the tools he used to stay sober. He took her on his morning walks, showing her the desert beauty he'd learned to appreciate in place of whiskey-dulled senses. He shared the letters he wrote to Emily, keeping a journal of his thoughts and struggles that he addressed to his sister, as if she could still read them. He explained how he'd found a community of sorts among the other sober men in town, a small group who met weekly to support each other and hold each other accountable. "There are 3 others," he told her. Jake, who used to drink away his mining wages, Samuel, who lost his family to his drinking, and old Mr. Peterson, who's been sober for 15 years. We meet Wednesday evenings at the church, just to talk and remind each other why we're doing this. Would you come with me sometime? I'd like you to meet them. Sarah did attend one of the meetings and found it both heartbreaking and inspiring. These men spoke openly about their struggles, their failures, their daily battles to stay clean. They celebrated each other's victories and supported each other through temptations. And they welcomed Sarah warmly, treating her as a partner in Boone's journey rather than an outsider. "You're good for him," Mr. Peterson told her after the meeting. "I've known a lot of men trying to get sober over the years, and the ones who succeed are the ones who have something to live for beyond just not drinking. Boone's got that something in you." It was a lot of responsibility, being someone's reason to stay sober, but Sarah realized it wasn't really about her. Boone's sobriety was his own choice, his own battle. She was just added incentive to a fight he was already committed to winning. And in return, he gave her something equally precious: proof that change was possible, that people could overcome their demons if they truly wanted to. On a cold December evening, 6 months after Thomas's death, Boone asked Sarah to take a walk with him despite the freezing temperature. She bundled up in her warmest shawl, curious about what had him so serious. He led her to the same spot on the edge of town where he'd first told her he loved her, where the desert stretched out endlessly under a canopy of brilliant stars. "I know it's only been 6 months, Boone began, his breath fogging in the cold air, "and I know people will say it's too soon, but I've waited long enough to say this properly." He pulled something from his pocket and dropped to one knee in the dusty ground. In his calloused palm was a simple gold band, worn but beautiful. "This was my mother's ring. It's the only thing of value I didn't sell for drinking money, because even at my worst, I couldn't bring myself to part with it. I've been carrying it for 2 years, waiting for the right woman to give it to. Sarah Sinclair, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of you? Will you take a chance on a reformed drunk who loves you more than life itself?" Sarah looked down at this strong, scarred man kneeling before her, offering her everything he had, and felt tears stream down her cheeks. 6 months ago, she'd been trapped in a nightmare marriage with no hope of escape. Now she stood on the edge of a new life, with a man who saw her as an equal partner, who asked instead of demanded, who fought his demons instead of feeding them. Yes," she said, her voice strong and clear. "Yes, I'll marry you." Boone surged to his feet and swept her into his arms, spinning her around as she laughed and cried at the same time. He set her down gently and slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "I promise you," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I will be sober every day of our marriage. Every single day I will choose you and choose sobriety. I will be the husband you deserve." "I promise you," Sarah replied, "that I will be patient when things are hard, that I'll support your sobriety however you need, and that I'll love you with everything I have." They kissed under the stars, sealing their promises to each other, and Sarah felt a peace she'd never known. This was what love was supposed to be: partnership and respect and choosing each other every day, not ownership or control or fear. They married in early January of 1877, a small ceremony at the Empire City Church with Mrs. Chen and Boone's sober friends as witnesses. Sarah wore a simple blue dress she'd made herself, and Boone wore his best clothes with his long hair neatly trimmed for the occasion. The preacher who'd buried Thomas 6 months earlier now joined them in matrimony, and if he thought the timing was hasty, he kept it to himself. Sarah spoke her vows clearly, without hesitation, and when Boone promised to love and honor her all the days of his life, she believed him with her whole heart. Their wedding night was nothing like Sarah's first one had been. Boone was gentle and patient, making sure she was comfortable every step of the way. He treated her like she was precious, valuable, cherished, and when Sarah finally felt safe enough to let down all her walls, to be vulnerable with him, it was everything she'd never known physical love could be: tender and passionate and full of mutual care. Afterward, lying in his arms in the bed that was now theirs, Sarah whispered, "Thank you for being patient with me." "Thank you for trusting me enough to marry me," Boone replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. I know that wasn't easy after what you've been through." "You're nothing like him," Sarah said firmly. "You're everything he should have been and never was." They built a life together in Empire City, a good life full of work and love and quiet moments of happiness. Boone's carpentry business grew as word spread about his skill and reliability. Sarah's dressmaking brought in steady money as more women came to her for custom work. They moved out of Sarah's small house into a larger one on the edge of town, with room for a proper workshop for Boone and a sewing room for Sarah. Boone kept his promise about sobriety. Every morning he woke up and chose not to drink. Every evening he went to bed sober. He continued attending his Wednesday meetings, and Sarah often went with him, becoming part of the small community of people supporting each other's recovery. He kept counting his days, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000. Each milestone was a quiet celebration between them, a recognition of battles fought and won. There were hard days, of course, days when Boone was short-tempered and tense, when Sarah could see the struggle in his eyes, days when something triggered a powerful craving, and he had to remove himself from the situation, going for long walks in the desert until the urge passed. But true to his word, he never hid it from her. He told her when he was struggling, asked for her support, used all his tools to stay strong. And Sarah learned that she could trust him to fight, to choose their life together over the temporary escape of alcohol. Sarah had her own struggles too. Sometimes a sudden movement or raised voice would send her spiraling back to those years with Thomas, her heart racing with remembered fear. Boone learned to recognize the signs, to move slowly, to speak gently, to give her space to come back to the present. He never took her fear personally, never made her feel weak for being affected by her past. He just held her when she needed holding and gave her room when she needed room. In the spring of 1878, Sarah realized she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She'd never had children with Thomas, and she'd always wondered if something was wrong with her. But here was proof that her body was fine, that new life was growing inside her. Boone was overjoyed, his face lighting up in a way she'd never seen before. "A baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We're going to have a baby." "Are you scared?" Sarah asked, because she certainly was. "Terrified," Boone admitted, "but in a good way. I want to be a good father, Sarah. I want to be the man my own father was before drink took him. I want to give our child everything I never had, stability, safety, a sober parent who shows up every day." "You'll be an amazing father," Sarah said with certainty. She'd seen how Boone was with the children in town, patient and kind, always willing to show a young boy how to hammer a nail or lift a little girl onto his shoulders to see a parade. He had so much love to give, love that had been wasted during his drinking years but was now ready to overflow onto their child. The pregnancy was difficult at times, especially in the brutal summer heat, but Boone was attentive and caring. He built Sarah a comfortable chair for her sewing room. He brought her water and food when she forgot to eat because she was focused on work. He talked to her growing belly, telling their unborn child stories and making promises about the life they would have together. In October of 1878, Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby boy with Boone's dark hair and her green eyes. They named him William Thomas Everett, using Sarah's maiden name Thomas as a middle name, reclaiming it from the man who'd made it a source of pain. Boone cried when he held his son for the first time, his big hands so gentle as he cradled the tiny infant. "I'm going to be sober for you every day of your life," he whispered to William. "I'm going to be here for you, always. You'll never know what it's like to have a father who chooses drink over his family. That's my promise to you." Sarah watched her husband with their son and felt her heart overflow with love. This was what she'd dreamed of, what she'd never thought she'd have. A family built on love and respect. A husband who kept his promises, a future full of hope instead of fear. Fatherhood transformed Boone in beautiful ways. He was devoted to William, waking up for night feedings, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor with a colicky baby for hours. He built a cradle with his own hands, carved with intricate designs of mountains and desert flowers. He sang lullabies in his rough voice that somehow soothed William when nothing else would. When William was 6 months old, Boone celebrated 3 years of sobriety. Over 1,000 days of choosing a different path, of fighting for his family, of being the man he'd promised his sister he would become. "I wish Emily could see this," he said that evening, holding William while Sarah prepared dinner. "She always believed I could be better. I wish she could see that she was right." "I think she knows," Sarah said softly. "Wherever she is, I think she knows, and she's proud of you." As William grew from infant to toddler, their house filled with laughter and life. Boone taught his son to stack blocks, to throw a ball, to pet the dog they'd adopted gently. Sarah made clothes for their growing boy and watched in wonder as her husband became the father every child deserved. Patient, present, sober. The town of Empire City embraced them fully now. The whispers about unseemly haste had faded, replaced by respect for the family they'd built. Boone was known as the best carpenter in town and a man of his word. Sarah's dressmaking business thrived. They were respected members of the community, proof that people could overcome their pasts and build new lives. In the summer of 1880, Sarah gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Emily Rose Everett in honor of Boone's sister. Boone wept openly when Sarah told him the name she'd chosen, overcome with gratitude and love. Emily was a bright, happy baby with her father's blue-gray eyes and a smile that could light up a room. 2 children, Boone said in wonder, holding Emily while William toddled around their feet. A family. "I never thought I'd have this." "You fought for it," Sarah reminded him. "Every day you stayed sober, you were fighting for this." Boone had been sober for 4 years now, over 1,400 days of choosing differently. The struggle never completely went away, but it got easier with time and purpose. He had so much to live for now. Sarah, William, Emily, the life they'd built together. The temptation to drink still whispered sometimes, but the voice of his commitment shouted louder. As the years passed, their family continued to grow and thrive. William grew into a bright, curious boy who loved helping his father in the workshop. Emily was adventurous and fearless, always exploring and getting into harmless mischief. In 1882, Sarah gave birth to twin boys, James and Benjamin, who kept them all on their toes with their matching grins and endless energy. Boone's carpentry business expanded. He hired apprentices, taught young men his trade, became a pillar of the community. He continued attending his sobriety meetings, now often as the one offering wisdom to newcomers struggling with drink. He'd been sober for over 6 years, over 2,000 days of choosing his family over alcohol. Sarah's dressmaking evolved into a proper shop with hired help. She employed 2 young women and taught them the trade, giving them opportunities for independence just as she'd had to fight for her own. She was respected as a businesswoman and a wife, proof that women could be both if given the chance. Their life wasn't perfect. There were still hard days, still struggles. Money was sometimes tight with 4 children to feed and clothe. Boone still had days when the craving for drink hit him hard, usually triggered by stress or memories. Sarah still had moments when past trauma surfaced unexpectedly. But they faced everything together, honest and open, supporting each other through difficulties. On their 5th wedding anniversary in January of 1882, Boone took Sarah back to the spot where he'd proposed. The children were with Mrs. Chen for the evening, giving them a rare moment alone. "Wait, 5 years," Boone said, holding her close as they watched the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and red. 5 years of marriage, 7 years of sobriety, the best years of my life. "Mine too," Sarah said, leaning into his solid warmth. "Do you remember when you promised you'd be sober every day of our marriage?" "I've kept that promise," Boone said. "Over 1,800 days of marriage, and I've been sober for every single one." "You have," Sarah agreed, "and I've never doubted you, not once. You've been everything you promised and more." "You saved my life," Boone said, his voice thick with emotion. "When I met you, I was sober, but I was just surviving. You gave me a reason to truly live. You and our children are everything to me." "You saved mine too," Sarah replied. "You showed me what love should really look like, what partnership and respect mean. You gave me the family and life I'd dreamed of but never thought I'd have." They kissed as the sun set over the Nevada desert, 2 people who'd found each other in the aftermath of their separate hells and built something beautiful together. A marriage based on choice and commitment, renewed every single day. A family built on love and honesty. A life that honored the struggles they'd overcome and the promises they'd kept. The years continued to roll by, each one bringing new challenges and joys. Boone celebrated 10 years of sobriety in 1885, over 3,600 days of choosing differently. Sarah's business continued to thrive. Their children grew healthy and strong, each one carrying the best qualities of both parents. William inherited his father's skill with tools and his mother's kindness. Emily had Boone's determination and Sarah's creativity. The twins were a perfect combination of both, rambunctious and loving in equal measure. In 1886, Sarah gave birth to their fifth and final child, a daughter they named Grace. She was a peaceful baby who seemed to complete their family perfectly. Boone was 46 years old now, his beard more gray than brown, but he was strong and healthy from years of hard work and clean living. Sarah was 34, still beautiful, still the woman who'd captured his heart in a graveyard all those years ago. They built a bigger house on the outskirts of Empire City, with room for all 5 children and both their businesses. Boone's workshop was attached to the house, and Sarah's sewing room overlooked the desert she'd come to love. They had everything they'd worked for: a home, a family, respect in the community, and most importantly, each other. On the 10th anniversary of their marriage, January 1887, they hosted a celebration dinner for the friends who'd supported them along the way. Mrs. Chen was there, beaming with pride at the family she'd watched grow. Boone's sober friends attended, men who'd witnessed his journey and celebrated his victories. The church preacher who'd married them came, along with neighbors who'd become genuine friends. As Boone stood to make a toast, Sarah looked around the table at the life they'd built and felt overwhelming gratitude. Their children sat squeezed together, laughing and talking. Their friends raised glasses of cider and lemonade in celebration. And her husband, her wonderful, strong, sober husband, smiled at her with so much love it made her heart ache. 10 years ago, Boone began, I married the most incredible woman I've ever known. I was a little over 2 years sober and terrified that I'd mess everything up. Sarah took a chance on a reformed drunk with nothing to offer, but a promise to stay sober and love her the best I could. He found her eyes across the table. I've kept that promise. 3,653 days of marriage, and I've been sober for everyone. I've chosen you in our family every single day, and I'll keep choosing you for as long as I live. Sarah stood and crossed to him, taking his hand. And I've never regretted trusting you, she said clearly. You've been the husband I dreamed of, and the father our children deserve. You've shown me what real love looks like, and I'm grateful for every day we have together. Their guests cheered and applauded as they kissed, and the celebration continued late into the night. The children eventually fell asleep in various corners of the house, worn out from excitement and too much cake. Sarah and Boone sat together on their porch as the party wound down, watching the stars emerge in the vast Nevada sky. Do you ever miss it? Sarah asked quietly. The drinking, I mean. Do you ever wish you could just have one drink to celebrate? Boone was silent for a moment, considering. I'd be lying if I said the thought never crosses my mind, he admitted. But no, I don't miss it. Not really. What I gained by quitting is worth infinitely more than anything I lost by giving it up. One drink would risk everything, and I'm not willing to gamble with our life together. I'm proud of you, Sarah said. Every single day, I'm proud of the man you are and the choice you make to stay sober. It's easier with you by my side, Boone replied, knowing I have you and our children waiting for me, depending on me. That's all the motivation I need. As 1887 turned to 1888, Boone passed 11 years of sobriety, over 4,000 consecutive days of choosing a different path. The children were thriving. William, now 9 years old, showed real talent for carpentry and loved working alongside his father. Emily at 7 was already helping her mother with sewing projects, her tiny stitches surprisingly neat. The twins at 5 were bundles of energy, keeping everyone on their toes. And little Grace, at 2, was the darling of the family, spoiled by everyone, but somehow still sweet-natured. Sarah and Boone's businesses continued to grow. They hired more help, trained more apprentices, became known throughout Nevada for quality work and fair dealing. They saved money, planned for their children's futures, built something lasting. But more than the material success, they'd built a relationship that stood the test of time. They still talked for hours, sharing thoughts and dreams and fears. They still made each other laugh. They still looked at each other across a crowded room and felt that spark of connection. They'd grown together instead of apart, their bond strengthening with each challenge they faced as a team. In 1890, Boone celebrated 13 years of sobriety. Over 4,700 days of being the man he'd promised his sister he would become. Emily would have been 39 now if she'd lived, and Boone often wondered what she would think of his life. He hoped she'd be proud. He hoped she'd approve of Sarah and the children. He hoped she knew that her death, as tragic as it was, had ultimately saved his life by forcing him to face his demons. "I think she'd love our Emily," Sarah said when Boone shared these thoughts. Their daughter Emily was 9 now, bright and kind and fiercely independent, and she'd be proud of everything you've built. "I hope so," Boone said. "I carry her with me every day, in my heart and in my commitment to stay sober. She deserves that much from me." As the years continued to pass, Sarah and Boone watched their children grow into remarkable young people. William became a skilled carpenter, working full-time with his father by the age of 16. Emily showed talent for both sewing and business, helping Sarah manage the expanding dressmaking shop. The twins were inseparable troublemakers with hearts of gold. Grace was developing into a thoughtful, creative child who loved music and drawing. In 1895, Sarah and Boone celebrated their 18th wedding anniversary. Boone had been sober for over 20 years now, more than 7,300 consecutive days. The struggle had become background noise, always there but manageable, no longer the daily battle it had once been. He'd built a life so full of purpose and love that alcohol held no appeal anymore. 20 years sober, Sarah marveled as they sat together in the home they'd built. "I'm so proud of you." 20 years of choosing us, Boone corrected. "Every day I wake up and choose our life together. That's never going to change." Their children were growing up and starting to make their own paths. William, now 17, had started courting a sweet girl from town. Emily, at 15, was already talking about opening her own shop someday. The twins at 13 were interested in ranching rather than carpentry or sewing. Grace, at 9, was still their baby, though growing up fast. Sarah was 43 now, with threads of silver in her dark hair. Boone was 55, his beard fully gray, his body still strong from years of hard work. They'd been through so much together, built so much, overcome so much, and they were still choosing each other every single day. As they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Boone took Sarah's hand the way he'd done thousands of times before. "I love you," he said simply, "more than the day I married you, more than I knew was possible. You're my everything." "I love you too," Sarah replied, squeezing his calloused hand. "You're the best man I've ever known and the best choice I ever made." They sat in comfortable silence as the desert sky blazed with color, two people who'd found each other in the aftermath of tragedy and built a beautiful life together. A life based on sobriety and commitment, on choosing love and partnership every single day. A life that honored the past while embracing the future. A life that proved redemption was possible, that people could change, that love could heal even the deepest wounds. William married his sweetheart in 1897 when he was 19, a beautiful ceremony that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. Seeing her son so happy, so ready to build his own life, filled her with joy and a bittersweet awareness of time passing. Boone stood proud beside his son, having taught him not just carpentry, but how to be a good man, a sober man, a man of his word. Emily opened her own small dressmaking shop in 1899 at the age of 19, with her mother's blessing and support. She had her mother's talent and her father's work ethic, and Sarah knew she would be successful. The twins, now 17, had apprenticed on a nearby ranch and were learning the cattle business. Grace, at 13, was showing signs of becoming a talented artist. In 1900, Sarah and Boone celebrated their 23rd wedding anniversary. Boone had been sober for over 25 years, more than 9,000 consecutive days of choosing differently. It was such a part of who he was now that people who hadn't known him in his drinking days couldn't imagine him any other way. He was simply Boone Everett, respected carpenter, devoted husband, proud father, pillar of the community. "We did it," Sarah said that anniversary evening, looking around at the life they'd built. "We built something real and lasting." "We did," Boone agreed, "and we're not done yet. We've got grandchildren to spoil and years ahead of us." Indeed, William and his wife welcomed their first child, a boy, later that year. Boone cried when he held his grandson for the first time, overcome with gratitude for a life he'd never imagined possible during his drinking years. He'd been given a second chance, and he'd made the most of it. As the new century dawned, Sarah and Boone looked to the future with hope and satisfaction. They'd overcome terrible pasts to build something beautiful. They'd proven that change was possible, that commitment mattered, that love could triumph over fear and addiction and trauma. Their children were happy and healthy, building their own good lives. Their businesses thrived, their community respected them. But most importantly, they had each other. After all these years, they still chose each other every single day, still talked and laughed and loved, still supported each other through hard times and celebrated good ones together. They'd built a marriage that was everything a marriage should be: partnership, respect, commitment, and genuine love. On a warm spring evening in 1902, as they sat on their porch watching another spectacular Nevada sunset, Sarah leaned her head on Boone's broad shoulder and sighed with contentment. "What are you thinking about?" Boone asked, his arm coming around her automatically. "How far we've come," Sarah said. "I was remembering that day in the graveyard when you first spoke to me. I was so broken, so hopeless, and now look at us." "Look at us indeed," Boone agreed. 25 years and over 300 days sober. A whole life built on the promise I made to myself and to you." "You've kept every promise," Sarah said. "Every single one." "And I'll keep them until my last breath," Boone vowed. "You saved my life, Sarah. You gave me a reason to fight, to be better, to become the man I was always meant to be." "We saved each other," Sarah corrected. "I needed you as much as you needed me. We healed each other." They sat in peaceful silence as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold and purple. Two people who'd been broken by their pasts but had refused to let those pasts define their futures. Two people who'd made choices every day to build something better. Two people who'd proven that love, real love, was about commitment and respect and choosing each other over and over again. The mountain man had kept his vow to be sober every day. The widow had learned to trust and love again. Together, they'd built a life worth living, a family worth cherishing, a love worth fighting for. And as the stars began to emerge in the vast Nevada sky, they knew that whatever challenges tomorrow brought, they would face them together, just as they'd faced every day for the past quarter century. Their story was one of redemption and second chances, of overcoming demons and building dreams. It was a testament to the power of commitment, the possibility of change, and the healing strength of genuine love. It was their story, and it was beautiful.